trying to learn algebra without a textbook or like write a history report, I don't know, without using the internet. It sounds kind of crazy,
Yeah, to
right?
learn to be back in time.
Exactly. But for millions of students, that's the reality. We're talking over 54 million students who rely on this program E-rate just to get connected.
It's huge. And recently he's been facing some pretty serious legal issues.
Yeah, legal challenges. That's a good way to put it. And, you've probably heard of E-rate, but just to recap, it's all about helping schools and libraries, especially in lower income areas, get the internet services and technology they need.
Right, it levels the playing field. And
Ex-
it's been around since 96, so it's had a huge impact.
Absolutely. But there's a new development, and it's a big one. A court just ruled that the way E-rate is funded, through those fees that are part of the Universal Service Fund, well, they ruled it unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional, wow. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. They even called it, get this, a misbegotten tax.
Misbegotten tax, harsh. So what happens now?
Well, the FCC is taking it up to the Supreme Court, so this is far from over.
Makes sense, the stakes are pretty high.
Definitely. Now, the group behind this lawsuit, Consumers Research, they're saying that setting taxes for programs like E-rate, that's Congress's job, not the FCC's. What's your take on that argument?
Well, it's complicated. It gets into this whole debate about who has the power to do what, regulatory bodies versus the legislature. But the interesting thing here is consumers research is using this thing called the major questions doctrine.
Okay, the major questions doctrine, I've heard that thrown around, but break it down for me.
Basically, it means that for really big issues, like ones with huge economic and political impact, Congress has to be super clear about giving power to agencies, like the FCC in this case.
Yeah.
They can't just, imply it. It has to be direct and spelled out.
So it's not just about who collects the money, it's about who gets to decide how it's collected and how it's spent.
Exactly. And here's another layer to this. The Universal Service Fund, or USF as it's called, it doesn't just fund E-rate.
Right, right. It's about way more than just schools and the internet. It's like essential communication services for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Think rural healthcare providers who need telehealth, or low-income families who need help affording a phone. This ruling could impact a lot more than people realize.
And the education community, they're definitely not staying quiet about this. I mean, they're calling the ruling absurd, saying that cutting off this funding is essentially like cutting off broadband access for a huge chunk of students.
Yeah, and they're not wrong to be concerned. Look, some people argue that schools should just fund their own technology.
Right, like it's their problem.
But the reality is a lot of districts, especially in lower income areas, they just don't have the money. E-rate helps even things out, make sure all students, no matter where they live, have a shot in our digital world.
Makes you wonder, without it, where would they be? Speaking of opportunities and evening things out, you mentioned the impact of E-rate, and I was looking at this FCC fact sheet, and wow, the numbers are pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
Yeah, get this. In just 3 years, E-rate has helped connect over, wait for it, 106,000 schools.
See, I told you, it's huge.
It's massive, but I think sometimes these big numbers, they don't really sink in.
Yeah, they kind of lose your meaning. It's just like a big number.
Exactly. So let's zoom in a bit. No surprise, California, Texas, New York, they're in the top 5 for E-rate funding. Big states, lots of students.
Right, makes sense.
But here's what I found interesting. Alaska and Florida, they're up there too.
Now that you mention it, I remember seeing that in the report. And, it's not even just about the money itself.
It's about what that money represents, the difference it makes.
Exactly. In those 5 states alone, we're talking about over 11 million students connected through E-rate.
11 million, that's more than the population of...
A lot of major cities, yeah. Think about it. That's like the entire populations of New York City and Los Angeles combined, gaining access to, crucial digital resources.
Wow, that really puts things in perspective.
Right. It really highlights how essential E-rate is in addressing this digital divide we keep talking about.
Because without it...
Oh, those disparities in education, especially when it comes to technology, they'd be even worse. It's not a perfect system, but it's making a difference.
A huge difference, clearly. But as we've been discussing, it's facing an uphill battle, to say the least.
Yeah, a lot of uncertainty right now.
And there's this other case involving Wisconsin Bell. It's an AT&T subsidiary that throws another wrench into things. Seems they're being accused of overcharging schools for E-rate services.
Yeah, that's been making headlines. And the thing is, it brings up a really interesting legal question.
Oh, yeah. Lay it on me.
So it all comes down to whether E-rate subsidies, the money schools get, whether they count as claims under the False Claims Act.
And that matters because...
Because if the courts say yes, those subsidies are claims, it could completely change how E-rate is overseen.
Some more scrutiny, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. And it could give schools a lot more power, legally speaking, to fight back against any suspected fraud.
So a lot riding on how this case shakes out. It could set a precedent for the whole program.
Exactly. It's about more than just one company. It's about accountability for the entire system.
Absolutely. Okay, switching gears a bit here. You remember the Emergency Connectivity Fund, ECF, lifesaver during the pandemic?
Oh, totally. Help schools get those laptops, hotspots, all that, so kids could actually do remote learning.
Essential back then. But that funding stream, as you know, it's gone, dried up.
It's a real shame. And honestly, a lot of schools are feeling the pinch. Like we've been saying, tech isn't just some add-on in education anymore. It's everything.
It's the foundation, practically.
Right. And without that ongoing support, especially for schools already struggling financially, it's tough. How are they supposed to keep up with the tech, maintain it, when the money's just not there?
It's tough. Like, where do we go from here, right?
Yeah.
ECF's gone. E-rate's got these legal battles going on. How do we make sure students aren't left behind with all this?
Yeah. It's a critical question.
Well, these articles we've been looking at, they've got a few ideas, some pretty interesting ones, like obviously bringing back ECF funding. That's a big one.
Makes sense. Got to start with the basics.
Right. But then there are these other, like, more creative solutions, like public-private partnerships.
Okay, so businesses stepping up.
Exactly. To create these funding models that'll actually last, for educational technology.
No, that's thinking long term. I like it.
Right. And then there's this whole idea of, like, device recycling, upcycling, that kind of thing.
Right. Give those old laptops a second life.
Totally. Schools could really stretch their budgets that way, refurbishing instead of buying brand new all the time.
Absolutely. Saves money, better for the environment. It's a win-win.
It is. And I was reading about some districts partnering with tech companies, and get this, they're having students help with the repairs and refurbishment.
Seriously. That's amazing. Talk about hands-on learning.
Right. The students are getting these valuable tech skills. The school save money. We reduce e-waste. It's like the perfect scenario.
It's a great example of like getting creative to solve these really complex problems.
Yeah.
It's not just about throwing money at it. It's about thinking differently.
And getting students involved. They're not just passive recipients. They're part of the solution. That's powerful.
It is. It builds that sense of ownership, responsibility, like we're all in this together.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. So big picture, it seems like digital equity in education, it needs a multi-pronged approach. We need the funding, yeah, but also these outside-the-box ideas and that commitment to, like, bringing students into the fold.
Couldn't agree more. It's a shared responsibility, really.
Yeah.
And if I could leave you with one last thought, it's this. This whole digital divide thing, it's bigger than just gadgets and internet speeds, right?
Mm-hmm. It's about opportunity, right?
It is. It's about making sure every student, no matter where they come from, what their background is, has the chance to succeed in this world that's only getting more digital. That's what's at stake here.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that was a lot to unpack today, from those E-rate legal battles to, like, students learning to fix laptops, talk about a range. What's sticking with you from all of this? It's a conversation that needs to keep going, don't you think?